Unsolicited advice.
What you whispering for? Yo, what's unsolicited advice? Take it or leave it. So, I have a theory. Let me put my shades on because eyes are still hurting. I don't think I got enough sleep today. I have a theory that bad parenting always equals, or usually, most of the time equals bad children, or bad young adults. It turns them into bad adults. A lot of times we see these things coming. They're small, especially you see it on social media. You see a lot more kids at a certain age cussing, acting like their parents, just being very negative, being bad. You see a lot of young people doing a lot of dangerous stuff or committing fatal acts and ruining the rest of their lives. And first thing a lot of us want to say is, where was the parent? Or they must wasn't raised in a good parent home. Now, sometimes that's not necessarily true. You could be a great parent to your child, and the child just has some type of mental behaviors where it's just something just not clicking, and they just choose to just do bad things. But for the most part, I've been seeing lately, there's way more bad parenting. And parenting plays a pivotal role in shaping, like, all the positive traits, and it also emerges like persistence of bad behavior too in children as they grow older. So it depends on the parenting pattern. But you have a lot of stuff going on lately where the parents just aren't parenting, the math ain't mathing, the parents aren't parenting. It's a lot of crazy stuff going on. But you're going to talk about how how bad parenting influences negative and bad behavior in kids. So usually starts with harsh criticism and harsh discipline. There's one thing to discipline your child, but it's another thing to deliver harsh discipline or physical discipline that's a bit too much. Like, yeah, I get it. Sometimes you spank your kid on the butt, or sometimes, you used to tap them on the hand, stuff like that, little stuff. But if you're taking out your belt or you're taking out some type of object to beat a kid, sometimes that does breed bad behavior down the line. And harsh criticism, just cussing your kids out, telling them they ain't shit, or telling them that, they're just like their father or just like their mother, or, something negative in their life, or just constant punishment or verbal attacks. What that does, that breeds like aggression, and defiance and withdrawal in kids. I've seen it too many times. The more you do that, all you're doing is hardening them. All it does is just makes them, you think it's making them stronger as a person, but what you're breeding is a beast of a person. So children, they're going to internalize shame, or they're going to lash out, and reclaim control. Because all those beatings, they're not going to feel that. They're going to become numb to that stuff. And, they're going to grab that belt, or they're going to grab that object you're beating them with, and they're going to snatch it out of your hand, and they're going to turn it around. I always say, your kid's going to get, I know you say, oh, you ain't too grown to get an ass whooping. Yeah, but some kids nowadays, you tell them to go to their room for a timeout, they come back out guns blazing. No bullshit. Then you have like people that neglect and are emotionally unavailable to their kids. They give them lack of attention, lack of affection, and that results in them attention-seeking behaviors or anxiety or depression. But I do see a lot of attention-seeking behaviors in kids. They'll do that because in their mind it's like, I gotta find something to do to get somebody's attention because I'm being neglected. I kind of was like that as a kid in a way. I was always trying to seek certain, and I'm not saying that people were emotionally unavailable, but sometimes I felt neglected. So I would do stuff and, it would get me in trouble. But I thought if I did those things, then people would recognize me, like being a class clown and stuff like that. A lot of times, children like that, they struggle with trust, and emotional stability. A lot of parents nowadays have inconsistent rules and boundaries. Parents are unpredictable and unclear nowadays. So children love to test those limits. They test them way more than they used to. I think my mom would say one time only. And most mothers back in the day, or fathers, they'll tell you one time, and half of them will probably beat your ass while they telling you one time. So there was no play. You wasn't gonna play around with that if they told you something. But what this does is it makes a child very impulsive, very dishonest, and they start developing that oppositional behavior, where they're just always opposing you because you haven't been consistent in your rules and your boundaries. And then you have parents that are over controlling and perfectionist, so it's excessive pressure to meet high standards. So now there's a fear of failure. Then they start avoiding you, and then they start in rebellion after that. So once that fear of failure kicks in, they're gonna start avoiding you, and then the avoidance turns to rebellion because they're just tired. It's like, man, ain't nothing ever good. Nothing is ever good. Everything has to be perfect, and then even then, it's not perfect enough. So now I'm just gonna rebel. Damn if I do, damn if I don't. So kids will become overly self-critical of themselves or disengage from challenges. It's like, man, you used to get straight A's. Why aren't you getting straight A's no more? Because when I got straight A's, you would ask me how come I'm not getting A pluses. An A is an A, but in your mind, I need to get the A plus. So dysfunctional behavior. If parents have dysfunctional behavior, children mimic what they see. So if you're dysfunctional, they're going to do the same thing because they're growing. They're growing up and they're trying to get on your level. They all, as little kids, what do they want? They want to be grown. They want to do, you're impressionable. They want to do what you do. They see you every day. So they think that this is the normal, but it's dysfunctional. So if parents handle stress with anger or dishonesty, kids are going to adopt the same thing, especially when they're in school. So you're asking, why did you lie to the teacher? It's like, well, watched you lie to mom, or I watched you lie to dad, or, I've seen you just lash out with anger and dishonesty. So I thought that if I didn't like something, that's what I'm supposed to do too. So, you sitting there getting on your kid about something that they saw you do because you haven't set those boundaries and you haven't set a standard. So, so a lot of that stuff leads to low self-esteem, constant criticism, all that stuff, anxiety, depression, aggression, defiance, which will lead to relationship issues and trust issues. I dealt with a lot of this in my life because that's how my life was. That's just how my life was. There was a lot of stuff. It was dysfunctional. There was a lot of stuff going on. So it led me to have a lot of relationship issues and trust issues. And then as I got older, I started realizing I was dealing with depression and anxiety, and I didn't even know it. I was having hypertension, issues with hypertension, and I didn't know it. It came out during the pandemic because didn't have nowhere else to go. And sometimes when you don't have nowhere to go and you're stuck in the house, it brings stuff out of you. What is it called? Cabin fever or whatever. It brings stuff out of you that you didn't know was in there. So, and doing this that I'm doing right now, it helped me get some things out. I like that. Now, of course, the question is going to be, can any of that be reversed, or is that just what it's going to be? Yes, parenting is powerful. You just have to be consistent. with your support, with your therapy, with being a positive role model. Everything is about consistency. So you can start right now and be consistent because they will know that something has changed and that, okay, all right, this is what the norm's going to be. This is what the normal is going to be. You know, my mom or my dad or both have started doing things this way, so I guess it's just how it's going to be. And that's how usually that's where the child starts falling in line. It takes a minute, but you start seeing it, you know. Another thing is you're their parent and you're not their friend. And some people take that as offense, but you see a lot of parents trying to be their kids' friends all the time. You know, like it's just weird. You know, you have I've seen some, like some dads will be very lenient because, you know, maybe they don't get to see the kids that much, so they're very lenient. So they make their kids very spoiled. You see a lot of moms, sometimes they'll treat their daughters like they mini-me's and they have them dressing inappropriately. Or sometimes they'll treat their sons like they boyfriends or something. Oh, you know, I'm on a date with my little man. You constantly seeing videos with them on their date with their son. It's like, okay, that's cute. But do you have a man? Do you actually have a man? You know, so, you know, so you got to do a lot of modern manifestations, you know. It's all psychological understanding, you know, like, you know, the bad parenting when it comes to like modern times, like right now, like you get a lot of helicopter parenting because of social media and all this dangerous stuff out here. You know, there's a lot of over involvement. So it stifles the independence and it creates anxiety in the children. That's why you have a lot of children that don't want to leave the home. They don't want to, you know, they don't want to drive. They don't want a job. They don't want to do anything because they're so used to their parent being a helicopter parent, constantly being there, you know, constantly protecting them. They have no real world experience on anything. Parental burnout and stress, you know, increased social pressure and economic strain can lead to, you know, parents being emotionally unavailable and inconsistent in discipline. You know, you have a lot of single parent homes, and if mom has to work a second and a third shift, you know, who's at home? You know, or maybe the grandparents have to take up some of the parenting, and you know, sometimes the grandparents don't have the energy. They're older. They don't have that energy to keep up, you know, and they don't know everything that's going on social media and stuff, so they don't know stuff when they see it. You know, a lot of that stuff's new to them, and the kids know that. So a lot of them act up, or they'll sneak out the house because there's nobody there to discipline. And I'm not saying it's your fault, but that's just society now. So, you know, if you're a single parent, you got to work 2 jobs. So that's 18 hours of the day that you're not around your child. You know, if not more. You know, 16 hours. Let's say you work 2 8-hour jobs a day. You know, 8 hours each, 16 hours. You know, it's 24 hours in a day. That means you only got another 8 hours that you can spend with your kid. And considering the time of day that you get off, they either sleep or in school. You know, so that does it. And sometimes it's the last little part too. Maybe it's just generational. Some of it's just generational. That stuff echoes. You know, parents often replicate whatever parenting style they experienced, or they try to do the opposite, and it backfires. So you either perpetuate the cycles, or you create an emotional detachment because you don't want to invite any type of discipline or structure. So there's a lot of bad parenting going on. And I don't have kids, but you see it all the time. I've worked at places. I've worked with kids. I've worked with families. I've worked a lot of state jobs where I've had to do things incorporated with the families. And you see it a lot. You see it a lot. And if you want to say that, oh, you don't have kids and what are you talking about? Hell, you can look no further than social media. I'm sure somebody else say, oh, some of that's fake, some of it's staged. No. Come on. It's out there. We all see it. We all see what's going on nowadays. And in the next video that I'm going to do, I'm going to explain it a little further with a lot of these men, the younger men, and some of these younger women, and how they're spiraling out of control. And some of it is due to bad parenting, or maybe the parents not, being able to be around in some form or fashion. But yeah, that's just my unsolicited advice on bad parenting. You're probably not gonna take it, so leave it. Bye.